Hi, and welcome to another episode of the COSP. Today's interview is really important to me and special because we are speaking with Robin Van Loon and Olivia Revilla from Camino Verde, the reforestation NGO that I worked with back in 2017 for my debut fragrance, Moena 1269. That fragrance was named after a botanical called Moena alcanfor, which is exclusively grown and distilled in the Peruvian Amazon by Robin and his Camino Verde team as part of their conservation efforts in the region. But we'll get more into Camino Verde's work in a bit. First, I wanted to introduce Robin, who's the founder and executive director of Camino Verde. Robin has lived in the Tambopata province of the Peruvian Amazon since 2004, a longtime student of traditional and indigenous agriculture and medicinal practices. His work is focused on developing community-based reforestation strategies to regenerate important endangered plants of the Amazon. He is a writer, regenerative designer, and a consultant in agroforestry, reforestation, and regenerative development. Olivia is the farm coordinator at Camino Verde's Baltimori Reforestation Center. Born and raised in Lima, but with maternal family ties to Madre de Dios, Olivia moved to the region full-time in 2006 and earned a BS in forestry. Before joining Camino Verde, she worked as a forestry technical assistant with C4 on the implementation of the analog forestry systems in the region. And as the farm coordinator at Camino Verde, at Camino Verde's main reforestation center, she actively manages the implementation and the monitoring of agroforestry systems, and she oversees the production on non-timber forest products. So welcome. We are so excited to have you here, and Sydney is going to kick off the first question.
Welcome. Thank you so much for speaking with us today, Olivia and Robin. My first question is for Robin. What inspired you to create Camino Verde?
Well, first, thanks for having us here. Pleasure to be here. It was actually a personal experience that inspired me to found Camino Verde. I had been living in Peru for a few years. I was a young guy and had been in a native community. And after living in this native community, I sort of had the idea that I would go and plant some of the plants that I had gotten to know in my time living there. This was in the Peruvian Amazon, and so there's a huge diversity of plants that are used in a community like the one where I was, for everything from what you build your house out of to what you heal your kids with when they're sick, or the delicious fruits and sort of incredible diversity of flavors that come from the forest. And I was just fascinated by everything that I was learning about and seeing as a part of people's day-to-day lives, and just sort of how intricately life was connected to the forest. And so to me, it seemed like a no-brainer that the next step to learn about these incredible plants, whether fruit trees or medicinal bark or timber trees that give like some of the best wood in the world. I sort of thought that I would be able to just like walk out from the native community and then just go to some nursery, some, tree bank, or, some government program. And it was actually really shocking that when I started looking for seeds and seedlings to kind of experiment on my own with planting some of these plants, what I would find would be like maybe some mango seedlings, like maybe some orange trees, some lemon trees. And it was really rare that you would find anything other than mahogany as one native tree that obviously has very high value timber. But if you wanted to plant kind of anything else of this incredible native biodiversity, people would just kind of look back at you with a blank stare on their face of like, you want to plant what, and it was that experience that really brought home to me the degree to which kind of the use of plant diversity in this part of the Peruvian Amazon was mostly extractivist in nature, meaning people harvest products from the forest. And indeed, like when I was living in the native community, I was watching different tree species just basically be eliminated from the forest based on the slight changes in timber price on the local market. So it was very clear that these weren't like managed plantations. It was you go out into the wild and find the abundance and the bounty that's already there. And not a lot of thought, not a lot of culture, also not a lot of research, not a lot of sort of government proactivity on the side of replacing what was taken from the forests, on the side of, okay, mahogany is exceptionally valuable. Can we plant more of it? Can we increase the populations? Because actually mahogany, like many other species, is a tree where you find, one per hectare, maybe. It's just such a diverse forest that each species is broadly dispersed. And so there are opportunities, I thought, to start sort of doing that kind of regenerative work on the species that traditionally and in modern times have really been just extracted from the forest, sort of in the fashion of like a kind of mining, if you will. And so it was each time I sort of learned about a new incredible tree species with a particular benefit or value, it sort of would become a challenge of like, okay, so where can I find seeds? And sort of the harder, the better. And eventually, Camino Verde has planted over 400 species of Amazonian trees at our Reforestation Center, and also more and more in native communities and on the farms of smallholder farmers. We're not so much an organization that's trying to plant as many trees as possible, no matter what. We're more interested in planting the right trees in the right place with the right partners. Yeah, we feel very grateful and fortunate, maybe now more than ever in 2020, to be able to be doing this work.
That's amazing. It sounds like you've been able to establish some really cool initiatives. Would you be able to tell us a bit about how the deforestation of the Tambo Pata, I apologize if I pronounced that wrong, province has affected local communities?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess the first response maybe will sound a little strange, but one way that it's really important to remember that deforestation has affected local communities is that it has benefited them economically. And it's sort of, that's why the deforestation is happening. It's people wanting to feed their families. It's, a family member gets sick and goes to the emergency room, and so you go and cut down that tree to sell the timber. As you can imagine, most Amazonian small farmers don't necessarily have a ton of capital to fall back on. And for many of them, the forests that they have access to is kind of where you go when you need economic sort of bailout even. And this is something that, of course, was not created by the people of Tambopata, the communities of the Amazon, but more is just the reality of kind of the market that's there, the demand that's there, and historically the ways that kind of resources have been extracted. And so that translates into even, in my experience in the 21st century, being in a native community and seeing trees being cut down to get the school uniforms, to get the notebooks. And so where the deforestation comes from isn't necessarily just an evil or just a greed. Really, in the case of smallholders, it's just you're trying to feed your family. Now, that said, there are also certainly kinds of deforestation and examples of deforestation that are really particularly sort of detrimental to the communities in a place like Tambopata. And this is kind of true for broad areas of the Amazon. You know, the Amazon basin is about the size of the continental United States. It's a huge region. But whether you're in Brazil, whether you're in Peru, Colombia, like a lot of the main drivers of deforestation are the same. It's ranching, it's agriculture, and in our case, in Tambopata, very significantly, it's mining, particularly artisanal gold mining. And so while in some Native communities, there are members of the community who actually are miners, in many cases, we've also seen sort of the unwelcome, unwanted, illegal deforestation activities that sort of affect communities in a much more negative way. And I'm thinking, when it comes to Tambopata, I'm thinking in terms not only of gold mining, which is sort of a famously bad one, but also cattle ranching to a smaller degree. And but then in terms of overall area, deforestation has mainly been from agriculture. And this is mainly in our region, smallholder agriculture. So again, it's not so much that it's a huge company coming in and clearing thousands and thousands of acres. It's more you're scratching a farm out of the forest, you know, cutting down the trees that get in the way of the sun so you can plant corn, so you can plant bananas. And smallholder farmers typically rotate their crops because when you plant annuals on fragile Amazonian soils under the intense sun and the intense rain, you lose your soil, and then you have to move on to a new site. So deforestation as practiced in communities, so to speak, rather than deforestation as a sort of an external force imposed upon the communities. When it's practiced in the communities, it's usually small, it's usually slash and burn. And actually in many cases, it's not as bad as you might think. The farming can be polyculture rather than monoculture. The farming can be agroforestry, meaning it includes trees and perennial elements. And so I guess I just want to point out that kind of deforestation, while it's like we certainly don't want more forest being cut down, there are historical roots to it. There is a history to sort of the management of Amazonian landscapes that kind of defies our current categorizations, like these binary ideas of, is it a farm or is it wild, you know? It's true that in places like Brazil and Colombia, and even in other parts of Peru, there are many more sort of drivers of deforestation that are imposed on communities rather than being embraced by the communities themselves. And this is where, you know, ranching, cattle ranching is really one of the principal drivers. And also where timber harvest can end up eliminating forests. On the other hand, in Tambopata, it's more driven by smallholders, again, looking to just sort of meet their basic economic needs. So you kind of can never separate out the social element. And the drivers of deforestation are economic in nature. So I will stop there and turn things over to my friend and colleague, Olivia, who's in our main reforestation center in Tambopata right now, to also sort of hand the mic over to her to talk a little bit more about how deforestation has affected the communities where she is right now. Olivia, bienvenida.
Thank you. Gracias. Bueno, espero no repetir mucho porque pienso de que mucho la idea que tenemos Robin y yo son muy parecidas, ¿no? Pero voy a hablar sobre un poco la experiencia como parte de la comunidad en el Tambopata, ¿no? Cuando yo he notado que en el transcurrir del tiempo, las actividades económicas aquí cambiaron, ¿no? Es decir, de que antes, como vivíamos en comunidad, era un poco más fácil poder tener acceso a los productos comestibles, ¿no? Es decir, cada familia
Perdón,
tenía...
te corto para dar la traducción,
Ah, vale.
para no correr mucho. So she says she's going to speak a little bit about the reality of the communities in Tambopata. And from her perspective, there's been a real shift in the economy of communities. And you can think about it principally as being access to food that's produced by oneself, which used to be really the norm in communities around Tambopata. Perdón, adelante.
Entonces, antes las personas teníamos acceso a los productos porque todos tenían un pedazo de tierra, un pedazo de chacra para criar sus plátanos, ¿no? Con la deforestación lo que ha sido acortando esos espacios de diversidad donde se han perdido muchas especies, tanto de la flora como de la fauna, ¿no? Y hemos perdido mucho de productos que antes consumíamos y que ahora no tenemos acceso porque no hay. Y según...
So she says that before everybody had access to food and kind of that autonomy from having just a small piece of land, what we call in Peru a chacra or a farm, where you can produce your plantains or whatever it is. But through the course of time, with the growing of those farms, the areas that are blocks of forest, of local biodiversity, have been getting smaller and smaller. Adelante.
Y pues ahora nos toca tener que conseguir dinero para poder comprar algunos de estos productos, ¿no? Porque ya no es de que lo tenemos como un acceso básico o como agregado de vivir en la tierra y trabajar en la tierra. Simplemente ahora les beneficia más a la gente vender sus productos que conseguir dinero para poder comprar otros productos, inclusive que no son de aquí, que no son de la zona, ¿no? La gente de la selva está dejando de consumir productos de la selva por productos de la sierra, por ejemplo, porque es más económico.
Olivia says now with, for example, with roads and also with urbanization, there is more a preoccupation with making money to buy food rather than producing one's own food. And so many people are selling their products from their farms to get money to then buy other kinds of food products. And with the access of roads to Andean regions nearby, such as Cusco, there's been an increase, for example, in the consumption of potatoes in Tambopata. And so local farmers may in fact grow plantains or grow cassava on their farms to sell those products to then consume products that are not local.
Bueno, además de algunas costumbres y el uso de plantas medicinales que la gente normalmente, mi abuelita y mi madre tenían mucho conocimiento y también tenían acceso a plantas nativas con las cuales podían curar sus males, sus enfermedades, y ahora tienen que optar por productos de fuera, ¿no? Químicos
the access to forests has also been significant in regard to medicines. And her grandmother, her grandparents, they would heal themselves with medicinal plants. And so deforestation, the removal of the really rich forests, has also meant people are moving more in the direction of purchasing pharmaceutical-based medicines rather than consuming their own local ones.
Vale, he hablado de todo, de la pérdida de la diversidad, pero también toca hablar de la deforestación lo que nos está afectando ahorita directamente en este momento es la minería, ¿no? Que está trayendo metales pesados, los cuales están erosionando los suelos, malogrando los suelos y que nos afectan directamente a la comunidad aquí en Camino Verde, porque a la larga nuestros productos sentimos que van a perder su naturalidad, ¿no? Que es lo que queremos conservar, pero vemos de que se está volviendo sensible en el tiempo por estas actividades, ¿no? Que nos están quitando la riqueza del suelo.
And in addition to the deforestation from agriculture, she says there's another kind of deforestation which has affected us more in Tambopata, but also specifically at Camino Verde, which is deforestation from mining. And this is usually artisanal gold mining rather than, heavy machinery. It's usually practiced along the rivers, but also increasingly as a source of deforestation away from the rivers. And it's introducing heavy metals and particularly mercury into the aquatic ecosystems and even into the forests as well. So this is something that Olivia says also sort of affects our ability to be in an uncontaminated natural environment and to produce products that are completely natural.
Es todo, gracias por la pregunta.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, I remember when I was in, thank you, Olivia. I remember, well, I have one question for her, and also just a side note, I remember when I was there, we were eating river fish, and like how important that was as like a sustenance, and how amazing it was to just be able to go and like get a fish from the river and everyone could eat it for lunch. And hearing about mercury in the water, I mean, that's really tragic for all of the forest community or all local communities that live in the forest. I'm wondering, how Olivia feels about the potential of forest communities losing these connections to plants, possibly. She mentioned plant medicine, and of course, she has that and her grandparents have that, but what about future generations? Is there a fear there that that kind of connection to plants can be lost?
La pregunta es acerca del uso de las plantas medicinales, ¿no? Y bueno, prácticamente si existe, entonces existe un temor de que el acceso y el conocimiento de las plantas se puede perder.
Bueno, es algo real que está pasando, ¿no? O sea, culturalmente hemos perdido muchísimo con el tema de plantas medicinales. Y existen cosas de que nos hace a veces reflexionar al respecto, ¿no? Como el tema de la pandemia ahora, con el tema de coronavirus, es un buen ejemplo para ver de que hemos como una cultura de medicina natural en plantas, hemos visto de que estábamos a punto de perder muchas especies o hemos tenido a la luz, a la cara, cerca muchas especies que en este momento nos ha funcionado porque hemos podido atacar el coronavirus con el matico, con la quinaquina, con otras especies, ¿no? de que tenemos al alcance nuestros quiones, el ajo, perdón, la jergonzacha, sí, era el jergonzacha, sí. Entonces todas estas plantas que nos han recordado que si hay algún mal lo tenemos todo para poder hacerlo, pero cada vez menos accesible. O sea, nos ha pasado que nos han pedido plantas y porque gente no tenía acceso, por ejemplo, a la quinaquina, ¿no? Entonces vemos de que cada vez está más lejos de nuestro alcance, pero existe felizmente porque estamos aquí. Yo no sé si en otras selvas también está pasando esto, ¿no? Pero esa es mi perspectiva del futuro, que sí que estamos perdiendo, pero cosas como esta nos hacen recordar que aún están aquí y que teníamos que continuar reforestando estas especies, ¿no?
That's a really nice answer. I hope I can do it justice with the translation. she says not only do we have the fear that the knowledge of medicinal plants could be lost and that the use of medicinal plants could be lost, but this is actually what's happening. That's actually how it is right now. And from a perspective of just culturally within sort of the broad social base, how much is known about medicinal plants, there's just no question that communities now know less than communities did before. And that the use of plants has also declined in recent years. But she says this isn't necessarily just a one-way progression. And during this year, with COVID times, with coronavirus, in fact, there's been a really curious and kind of hopeful resurgence in interest in medicinal plants. And even in Puerto Maldonado, the regional capital, small city, there have been many people asking us at Camino Verde, do we have this plant? Do we have this other plant? And there have been experiences in communities using medicinal plants to help prevent, but also to even help somebody make it through a case of COVID. And Olivia mentions matico, which is a plant that is used for respiratory conditions, which some native communities have found really effective. And quinaquina, which is a very bitter medicinal bark. We've had people request tree seedlings of quinaquina so that they could plant them in their farms or in their home. And so while it's definitely true that the sort of general knowledge and the use of medicinal plants has been in decline, it's also sometimes encouraging to see that something unexpected can bring back interest very quickly. Unfortunately, though, people have less access than they did before to medicinal plants, as those living in the city are kind of actually living further and further away from the forest as time goes by and as deforestation advances.
Thank you so much for that answer. You've been giving us a much clearer picture of what it actually looks like on the ground and how the local communities are being influenced. And I want to shift us a little bit. You actually talked a little bit about this in terms of what non-timber forest products are in terms of medicine and food and things like that. But if you could just give our listeners a little bit more of a definition about what exactly is a non-timber forest product.
Olivia, ¿te animas? Este es sobre los productos forestales no maderables. ¿Qué son?
Los productos forestales realmente son todo lo que tú puedes aprovechar dentro de un bosque, en diferentes tipos de bosque, todo lo que tú puedes aprovechar en este caso.
When we talk about forestry products or forest products, what we're talking about ultimately is everything that you can make use of in a forest. It's a very broad term to talk about forest products. It means kind of everything you can imagine that's useful in a forest.
Bueno, el nombre no maderables viene a razón de que se había generalizado el nombre productos forestales para solamente el aprovechamiento de la madera. Entonces, para darle un valor a estas otras actividades que aunque no tenían no generaban mucha economía, pero sí también eran parte de los productos, ¿no? Entonces, por eso es de que se creó este nombre para productos forestales no maderables, un poquito para resaltar o para demostrar de que existen otros productos del bosque que no es solamente el aprovechamiento de la madera, porque hay muchos aprovechamientos dentro del bosque.